The schedule is set. How will Scott Frost manage his first year as UCF's head coach?
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on into Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike G, and thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every day. For the first word from the last word on sports is my good friend, Andrew Gluchov. Andrew, the schedule is set. The flow of the schedule is set. We've known who the opponents are going to be, but now we know the when and the how and the where. So I want to start talking about this schedule and what UCF has in front of them. My first impressions about this schedule was this is super manageable for Scott Frost in his first year. This is actually a fairly good schedule, I think, for a first-year head coach or a second first-year head coach.
Well, we said that that was kind of the feeling last year when you look at the opponents, like, oh, this is a very friendly schedule. But the truth is, this is a balanced schedule. You've got the 3 home games for your non-conference schedule, and then it alternates, the rest of the way. There's no top, it's not like a backloaded road schedule. So you're going to have the opportunity to mix the road and the home. And I think the bye weeks are well placed. This is a very favorable schedule for UCF and Scott Frost.
Schedule here for a second. You open up at Jacksonville State at home on August 28th. After that, North Carolina A&T. That's family weekend, September 6th. There's an early bye week. I don't know how I feel about a bye week so early in the season, but we'll talk about that in a second. And then you have North Carolina at home again. So 3 straight home games to open up the season. That's September 20th for North Carolina. Let's start there. How do you feel about the flow of this opening schedule?
Well, as we know, UCF's non-conference schedule is not particularly heavy. Jacksonville State was conference champion of Conference USA last year, but Rich Rodriguez, their head coach, is gone. He went to West Virginia, who UCF will see later, and as a result, a lot of players left the program. So this is an entirely new team. This is going to be their first opportunity to play, much like UCF's. UCF should have more talent in this one. I expect, Jacksonville State not to lay down and die, but I expect UCF to win this one. The following week, September 6th, the second week, that's their family weekend, North Carolina A&T, out of the CAA, an FCS school. It's there for the budgetary reasons. This is a team that has greatly struggled over the last 2 years, 1 win each the last 2 seasons. This would be a great opportunity for UCF to really start tuning up their team because you're going to have a lot of changes, a lot of new personnel, a lot of new, schemes. That leads into the bye week, which I think is actually well placed here because of all this newness going on with this program. You get that extra week to kind of work things out. And then it leads into that big one against North Carolina, who, again, new team, new coach. Obviously, Bill Belichick is the coach there, so that's a game that's going to be highlighted on the schedule as perhaps one that the TV partners are going to want to circle as long as both teams start off okay. And then you start diving into the conference schedule. You go back and forth. I got to say, I'm really pleased at how this schedule worked out for UCF. We already knew the first 3 games, but the rest of it could not really have worked out better for the Knights.
Yeah, we talked last week about that non-conference schedule, so you get most of that in these first 3 games, Andrew. Again, I'm looking at that North Carolina game as well. Again, you match off against Bill Belichick. This could be a media circus around this game. And if you're Scott Frost, that's the attention that your program needs in year 1. You beat Bill Belichick, a multiple Super Bowl winner in week 3. And I think that it opens up some doors for you, especially from a program perspective. So super interesting. I think this is a way too early prediction, but I like UCF in this game. I think Scott Frost is going to pull some tricks out of the bag in week 3 to try to get that win. Moving down the schedule, you're at Kansas State. So this is your first road test of the season. And then you've got Kansas at home, at Cincinnati, and then West Virginia at home. So a little bit of a flip-flop here. Andrew, after North Carolina, you've got Kansas State. This is your first road test of the season in Manhattan. Then you come home for Kansas. You're at Cincinnati, and then you've got West Virginia at home before your next bye week. So that's a very, very manageable, I think, slate of games after you play North Carolina, essentially to open Big 12 play. What do you think about those next 4 games sandwiched in there in the middle of the season?
Well, that Kansas State game away, in my opinion, is the hardest game of the year. It's your first road game of the year. It's the first conference game of the year, and it's against a strong opponent. So I think, I've always been a fan of having a road game within your non-conference schedule to kind of just get yourself primed for the conference gambit. Because when push comes to shove, the goal is always win a conference championship. The non-conference games, if you lose them, you lose them, but it's not going to impact your status within the conference. So by not having a road game and then getting thrown right into Kansas State, that's probably the toughest one. But with the rosters turning over so much every year, it's hard to say yet, because we still have another window of opportunity for players to come and go, what Kansas State's going to look like. But I have that game circled as definitely a difficult game. I think it scales back a bit when you play Kansas at home. You have that home field advantage. And then at Cincinnati, I think is a golden opportunity for a big win against a rival team. Cincinnati has largely struggled since Scott Satterfield took over that program. Then the last one, West Virginia. That's UCF has never had good luck against West Virginia. They're winless against them. Rich Rodriguez has left Jacksonville State to come back home to West Virginia. While I said Kansas State is one of the most difficult games of the year, West Virginia is the most difficult home game of the year.
They picked them for homecoming, though, Andrew. They picked them for homecoming.
Well, I mean, you don't want it too early in the season, and you don't want it too late in the season. Who else are you going to pick? Are you going to go like the end of the year, when you get close to Thanksgiving, or do you go in the beginning of the year? I think it's kind of the right time. This is October 18th. It's the right time for homecoming. I don't think October 3rd against Kansas is right, and I certainly don't think November 22nd, which is going to be Oklahoma State, we'll talk about that in a bit, is correct either. As we'll talk about in just a moment, the Houston game's untouchable for a very specific reason, and most fans know why. So we've talked about the first 3. We've talked about the next 4. Now we have the 5-game home stretch, because there's a bye week in between that West Virginia game and the game after, Mike. And you were talking about you weren't sure about for a bye week. Right now for UCF, it's going to be October 25th.
Yeah. Look, it is. It's tough. It's tough, I think, when you're trying to look at the flow of this schedule. Ultimately, when do you pick homecoming, right? And who do you pick for homecoming? A lot of teams see that, Andrew, as disrespect. You're making us your homecoming game. Usually that's supposed to be a guaranteed win, but you mentioned the history there. They have not had good luck versus West Virginia, but I agree. I don't think that there's a better spot for homecoming there. I just wanted to note that they were picked as the homecoming game.
Fair enough. So October 25th is a bye week, and then you start the final stretch of 5 games starting November 1st at Baylor and Waco. Baylor, you never know what kind of team's going to come out of Waco. I think this is a favorable matchup. UCF wants some revenge after the epic collapse of 2023, where UCF had an amazingly large lead and then piddled it all away and lost the game. Then after that, November 8th, it's Houston. It's the space game. I think against Houston, this is perfect. The Cougars, not a great program. Weird things happen in the space game, but it's usually UCF clobbers whoever they're playing including good teams. Doesn't matter if you're good or bad. Usually end up being, trounced pretty soundly. Couldn't pick a better opponent than the Houston Cougars, just the way it works out. If there's one game fans go to, it should be the space game on November 8th against Houston.
Arizona was the space game last year. Obviously, UCF won that one big. But look, that Baylor matchup stands out to me. Again, after the second bye week, you got Baylor on the road, and then you have the space game against Houston, Texas Tech on the road after that, Oklahoma State at home after that, and then at BYU to finish your season. Andrew, this schedule flip-flops quite a bit, home away, home away, home away. I'm not sure I've seen anything like this in recent memory for UCF.
Well, it works out. As I said, I couldn't be happier. BYU's tough game to end the season. November 5th, anyone playing at Lubbock has a challenge. Texas Tech is just a historically strong home team. Weird things happen there. But you know what? I'd rather have that in the later part of the season than in the front part of the season, because this is a team that's still going to be working to find themselves, still learning, new systems, new players. So by having it in the back third of the year, I think UCF has a better chance of being competitive in this one. But you've got Oklahoma State who did not have a good season, despite having one of the best running backs out there in Ollie Gordon last year. They struggled mightily, and then that BYU game, UCF and BYU have had some interesting matchups over the years. I'm actually excited. It's always been a bucket list thing to go to Lavelle Edwards Stadium that has one of the best scenic views out of any stadium in the country. If my wife lets me travel away from her over Thanksgiving week, I want to go there. That just saying.
Yeah, so many great venues in the Big 12. Again, a lot of flip-flop on the schedule, home away, home away. I like the 2 bye weeks thing that they're doing now. I actually think they got favorable bye weeks here. I don't love the end of the year bye week a whole lot. Once you get into a flow, sometimes taking a week off can work against you. So where they have their bye week, you get a chance to finish on a roll if that is indeed what you're on. But who is the toughest test that UCF has on their schedule? We're going to talk about that right after a quick word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Andrew, looking for tickets to your next big event, whether it's a concert or a comedy show or a sports game, finding the right ticket price can be a headache, but with Game Time picks, it's never been easier. I think you got tickets to go see the Savannah Bananas here pretty soon, huh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beginning of the month.
Yeah, look. So whether you're going to see the Savannah Bananas, or if you just want to go see your favorite team, including the UCF Knights, visit our friends at Game Time. Ready to make your next event even better? Download the Game Time app and create an account. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. All right, let's see here. Who's the toughest test on this schedule coming up? Look, I still think it's BYU, but I'm starting to be intrigued by that Baylor matchup in the middle of the season. Look, obviously BYU was a fringe playoff contender here toward the end of the season. As a matter of fact, they weren't, I don't know if even fringe is fair, Andrew, they were in prime position to make the playoff before they kind of imploded down the stretch here, but they should still be formidable next year. Who's your toughest matchup on the schedule for UCF coming up?
Well, I'll tell you when you mentioned BYU. BYU still has their quarterback in Jake Retzlaff. Watch out. This was a really good guy. He looked really sharp against UCF when they played in Orlando. This is going to be by the end of the year, so he's going to be in complete, mid-season form. So, but I actually still have Kansas State as one.
Really?
Even though Texas Tech is a tougher place to play, I think Kansas State's going to be a tougher opponent because of where UCF's position is going to be. They're still going to be learning a new system, getting players fully acclimated. Even veterans who've been on this team for a while are still going to be acclimating. So I think that early test is going to be a little bit more difficult, a little more opportunity for something to go wrong, as opposed to later in the year against Texas Tech or BYU, where basically UCF's going to be about as good as they're going to get at that point. Other than West Virginia, which is a home game, you're right. The bulk of the difficult games are on the road. BYU, Texas Tech. I can't stress enough how difficult it is to play in Lubbock as an opponent. And then Kansas State, the Cincinnati game, I'm not really putting a lot of stock in, even though it's a rivalry game and things happen in rivalry games. This is not a good Cincinnati program. They need a lot of work. And Baylor, I'm not as wowed by the intrigue of Baylor as you are. To me, it's not as exciting. But that Kansas State game, you're starting the Big 12 season under the Scott Frost regime. Are you going to start it on a good note or a bad note? I think there's a lot more in play than just a game. You got to really establish that momentum going into the Big 12 schedule, which makes it that much harder. And then, of course, the bookend against BYU, where you have a team that has is very collected. They have their quarterback. It's not like there's as much movement going on compared to some of these other programs.
Agreed. I want to point something else out about the schedule before we move on, Andrew. Is it odd to you that UCF doesn't play another team from the state of Florida on this schedule? I know they're in the Big 12, but even in the non-conference, no other Florida teams on the schedule here.
It's just the way it works out. I know at one point UCF and South Florida talked about it, but South Florida's schedule, non-conference schedule, was booked through 2028. So obviously that wasn't happening. They've got little bits here and there with, they were able to schedule Florida International and Florida Atlantic. They have the game last year against Florida, and then they have Florida again in 2030 and 2034. Florida State doesn't want to play them. And I can understand why Florida State doesn't want to play them. And then Miami almost signed a home and home with them, which they once did prior back in the late aughts. But someone got in their head about, play UCF's home game at Camping World Stadium, which UCF will not do. You lose that home field advantage. They are not interested in taking a home game and convert it. Maybe if it was a neutral site game, where the neutral sites usually make sure that each team is whole on their expenses and all that stuff, so they make a good amount of money. You're not, I don't see, the Camping World Stadium kickoff, whatever they call it, classic, scheduling Miami versus UCF, and just yet. But yeah, in particular, Miami and Florida State don't really want to play ball against UCF. I think there is a degree of fear of legitimizing the Knights. They win. They're a power conference team. They have the chance to start stealing recruits. They may not have as much money yet. They're still working their way up. They don't have the generational fan base or talent pool like some of these schools have, but they're the young upstarts. They offer some things that the other schools don't. Do you want to be just a part of history, or do you want to write the history? And different players they have different needs and wants and all that. Look at the story of RJ Harvey. There's a really good YouTube video, or UCF came out with a really good video, and I'm sure they'll put it up on YouTube if they haven't already, about RJ Harvey and his hometown hero legend that has been built over the years. You can now use that story as a way of saying, do you want to be the next hometown hero, the next legend that you say? You can't do that with Miami or with Florida State. There's too much history already there. So you have a chance to write the history at UCF and cement yourself as a legend versus just being one of a bunch of good players at these other schools.
Yeah, look, super interesting, I think, when you talk about other Florida teams maybe not wanting to legitimize UCF by playing them. UCF logs a win, and now they can hold that head-to-head over their head. Woo, compelling stuff, man. Scott Frost can make some waves coming back into it, but also as he begins to build the program, as I believe he will, there may be an opportunity there for them, for these other Florida schools, to get a tough game on the schedule in the non-conference that may help boost your strength of schedule. We'll see if they need it. But look, now that we have a full picture of the schedule, we've talked a lot about floor and ceiling, but I want to revisit this conversation about managing expectations and what they can do here. We'll be right back with our last segment, talking about how you manage expectations on this new schedule. Andrew, I felt like floor 6-6, and I think we both agree on the floor for this, what the floor for this team should be, right? Like 6-6. You got to win 6 games. You have enough talent to win 6 games. You've got a great coach in Scott Frost. It's hard for me to see them under this coach doing worse than that. Obviously, Gus took them to new lows last year. But however, moving forward, I think it's pretty favorable here, especially with the home games. So re-looking at the schedule, I think UCF has a chance to sweep the home games on the schedule.
I mean, it's certainly possible. I mean, that West Virginia game, I don't know, man. That they don't seem to have it against West Virginia. So I don't know about that, but I certainly see 5 wins at least. Yeah, I expect UCF to sweep the non-conference. I think Houston and Oklahoma State are winnable. Then you got Cincinnati, that should be a win, and then maybe Kansas as well. So 6-6 is still my floor. This is a schedule that you need to make a bowl game. And I believe that anyway. Every year you should be a bowl team. If you're respecting, respect the team, you've got to qualify for a bowl game. Obviously UCF fell short.
Where's your ceiling though?
Where am I? To be honest, every game on this is winnable. That's the problem. They all have a degree of winning. I think the ceiling, if everything bounces right, I think 10-2. I don't see them winning at Texas Tech, and I don't see them winning at Kansas State. I think every other game is a lot more winnable. But I mean, as we know, football's a game of inches. Sometimes it's all about the way the ball bounces. Even during UCF's 25-game winning streak, there were times where if the ball bounced the other way, we wouldn't have a 25-game winning streak to talk about or a national championship. None of that stuff. So sometimes it's just the way the ball bounces, the good luck versus the bad luck. If the luck goes well, I see 10-2 is a very strong ceiling, especially in year one. But 6-6,
10-2
is 6-6 is my floor. There should be no reason why UCF should be any worse than that.
At 10-2, you're talking about UCF as a fringe playoff contender. I just want to make sure I'm clear here. 10-2,
I'm just saying,
the conversation
bounces their way. I cannot stress enough. That is a you talk about floor versus ceiling. Ceiling is everything going right. They're all winnable games, but I don't see them winning them all. Hence the 10-2.
I want to say this: if Scott Frost takes this, what ended up being a 4-8 team, to 10-2 in year one, he should be firmly in the conversation for National Coach of the Year. This will be one of the better turnarounds that we've seen in college football over the last decade or so. Only a few teams have turned it around. I would say 2013, Auburn comes to mind. They were 3-9 the year before Gus came back to the Plains. Obviously, they lost one game and ran all the way to the national title. You don't see those types of turnarounds very often. So, when you're talking about, and for our listeners at home, I just want to make sure, again, we're setting the conversation. When we talk about that ceiling, like you said, if the ball bounces your way, what is your best case scenario? And what is your worst case scenario when you're talking about the floor? There are very few teams, I think, in the Big 12 that don't have enough talent to go at least 6-6, Andrew. So 6-6 is a reasonable expectation for a floor. Now, the ceiling, we got to enter fantasy land a lot more when we're talking about the ceiling for a lot of these teams. But I'm with you. I think it is achievable, and I think that it's a really good schedule draw for year one for Scott Frost. Probably one of the best he could have hoped for. So it's going to be fun watching to see how they handle the journey. Andrew, I want to thank you for joining me today. Before we get out of here, tell people where they can find you.
You can catch me on Twitter/X or Blue Sky at StatBoyDrew, and you can catch my writings on The Last Word on College Football, a part of The Last Word on The Last Word on Sports family.
Guys, thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every day. For your second listen, go check out our friends over at Locked On Big 12. Our guy, Drake Toll, leads the conversation in conference realignment news and pulls no punches when it comes to talking about every team in the Big 12, including the UCF Knights. You can find Locked On Big 12 on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. You can find us here tomorrow on Locked On UCF.